Just as a quick note before we get started this week, we recorded this episode a week before the Bill and Ted Face the Music new trailer dropped, so we don't talk about that, and that's why. We're really looking forward to it, but spoiler, we're talking Bill and Ted movies this week on Screen Geeks. Hey everyone, welcome to Screen Geeks. This is Dave.
And this is Bill S. Preston Esquire.
I'm sorry, I should have rolled with that joke. I'm ashamed. I'm deeply ashamed. This week, in honor of Bill and Ted Face the Music eventually coming out at some point in some capacity, we thought over 6-7 years of us doing podcasts, surely we talked about the Bill and Ted movies, and it looks like we haven't. I know we've mentioned them, but we never did an episode. So we're going to go ahead and rectify that this week because it seems timely. And the fact that we've got a third movie coming that I never really would have expected was going to happen. Granted, we weren't even expecting a second one. So there is that. We're faced with an interesting proposition. I haven't even run this by you yet, Barry. Do you want to talk about this from the cultural standpoint like you do with every other movie, or do we want to talk about like where we were as young teenage boys when this movie came out?
That's a good place to start because we can get into the cultural stuff. No, I mean, I saw this one in the theater. It came out in 1989. It was right before that gigantic summer of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Tim Burton's Batman and Ghostbusters 2 and Do the Right Thing. One of the greatest summer movies ever, movie summers rather. And this thing came out like right in the spring season. It was a total sleeper. Nobody. People knew Alex Winter as one of the vampires in The Lost Boys. Keanu Reeves got some great reviews because he was in a film called River's Edge, but at this point, he really wasn't very well known. This was a breakout movie for both of them. The director of this movie, Stephen Herrick, went on to make movies like The Mighty Ducks, and he became a very successful and very prolific filmmaker. He still is. But everything about this was just a total surprise. We spoke a couple weeks ago about John Wick, about what a sleeper that was. Very similar situation here. The trailers looked good. The posters were ubiquitous. Orion Pictures, they really got behind this movie and they gave it a really good push. I don't think there was a comic book released that season that didn't have the poster on the back. I love it when
No kidding.
I love that. But I mean, really, it looked incredibly silly, but I didn't think it would A, be any good, and B, be the cultural phenomenon that it was and still is.
It was absolutely a cultural touchstone. Let's just roll the trailer clip right now, and then I'll talk a little bit about what my theory is of these films. But yeah,
Okay.
we'll be right back.
Now, a motion picture so grand, so magnificent, and so vast, it spans 7,000 years.
No way! Yes way!
But it starts with Bill
I'm Bill S. Preston!
Who was Joan of Arc?
and Ted,
Noah's wife? We're in danger of flunking most heinously tomorrow.
a force from the future,
Can we go anywhere we want at any time?
You can do anything you want.
is putting history at their fingertips.
Let's reach out and touch someone.
So I kind of have a theory about these movies in that every generation kind of has this goofy, stupid, fun movie that resonates with mostly male audiences. I don't know that we've had one recently necessarily, but like going back to this early 80s, like going back to Strange Brew with Dave Thomas and Rick Moranis, that was growing up, all the older kids and the younger adults were like, hey, have you seen Strange Brew? Have you seen Strange Brew? That ended up becoming what Bill and Ted was. Now, little did I know that a decade later, we'd have the Wayne's World movies. And then, a decade or so after that, we'd have Napoleon Dynamite. And then, Dude, Where's My Car? Some of these have more artistic value than others. And I would say Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, surprisingly, especially like you said, you didn't expect it much at the time, definitely it belongs in the upper echelon of those films.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, being in junior high and just being like, I didn't go to the movies that often. So I didn't get to see this in the theater, but all my friends were like, have you seen Bill and Ted? Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And for full disclosure, I grew up literally in the valley, like oh my God, Gag Me with the Spoon, like the San Fernando Valley in the 80s. So these guys like resonated with me on a very deep and core level. Like Dude is still a major multi-purpose vocabulary word for me. Like it has many different meanings depending on the context it's used in. So seeing these guys just be these complete goofuses who are just good natured and good hearted, just trying to make it and try to pass history class, it hit me just perfectly in the right spot when I finally saw it.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was incredibly charming. It's funny, we'll get into this more later, but just as an introductory statement, it's funny to look at it now and realize, wow, this movie actually has some kind of rough PG humor in it. It's some of it has not aged very well, and some of it's a little, because I remember it being like a very appropriate kids movie, and I look at it now and I go, oh yeah, I'm not showing this to my daughter until she's a teenager because this is it's not always appropriate. But
you don't want to have to explain 69 dudes. You just don't.
There's all sorts of stuff in this movie I don't want to have to explain, but that's a very good example. Yeah, Bill and
She's
Ted,
your mom, dude.
She's your mom, dude. Like it goes back to, like it's like a classic, comedy duo. We're talking about Laurel and Hardy or, Abbott and Costello. Like it's that classic comedy duo. But at the same time, I think we have to talk about the influence, obviously, of Cheech and Chong, but without the drug humor. And of course, the character Spicoli that Sean Penn played in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. There's a lot of Spicoli in Bill and Ted. But it is interesting, and I think you really nailed it when you mentioned those other films like Wayne's World and also Even Dude Was My Car. These movies are almost completely devoid of drug humor, even though they star two guys who seem like they're constantly stoned. It's also obviously the comedy angle is that these guys are just really stupid. Bill and Ted, and you can even make the argument that Bill and Ted never get stoned ever. Well, fine. But they're just incredibly stupid. They don't need narcotics because their mind's already gone. That was the tagline in the poster. I'm probably going to mangle it, but it was something like "History is about to be rewritten by two guys who can't even spell." It's something like that. And that's the appeal. It's not Marty McFly or Doc Brown. It's not H.G. Wells, a time machine. It's what if we allowed time travel to be in the hands of two of the dumbest people who ever lived.
But they're guided by the comedy genius that is George Carlin. So that makes it all okay.
Yeah, bizarrely. Yeah, I was just reading that the role was written for Eddie Van Halen because they thought it would be hilarious if like they were talking about Eddie Van Halen while Eddie Van Halen was on the screen. And apparently because they couldn't afford Eddie Van Halen, that wasn't going to happen. But somehow they could afford George Carlin. It's odd because and I do love Carlin in these movies. He's very charming, but let's be honest. I mean, Carlin is a comedy god. He's one of the greatest stand-ups ever. I put him up there with Richard Pryor and who else? My other gods are Robin Williams and Sam Kinison. I put him up there with those guys. It's not that he's ill-used in this movie. It's just that he's a lot better than this movie and this role of Rufus. But the funny thing is, Dave, and I'm sure you can relate to this as well as I can. This is my introduction to George Carlin, and a lot of kids. I mean, they know him as Rufus. They don't know him for his legendary acts and his groundbreaking comedy. They know him as Rufus, the straight guy in the Bill and Ted movies,
or as the Cardinal in Dogma.
Yes, that too. We shouldn't forget that. Or the hitchhiker in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
Yeah, there we go. It's such an odd movie. Like that. I could see back then the primary driving force being like, wow, this soundtrack is amazing. Because let's be honest, it's like if you're into rock, it is a great soundtrack from top to bottom.
I love the soundtrack. Yeah, a couple of years I'd be driving from Colorado Springs to Denver to Starfest, and I would always crank up my cassette tape of this. I love the song "Breakaway," the opening song by Big Pig.
Yes,
I love it. Freaking love that song. And
or "Play with Me" by Extreme is just so good.
Yeah, and the song "Two Heads Are Better Than One." I dig the soundtrack to this movie. Now, you're right. It's cool to think that they actually managed to produce a really fine soundtrack to a movie that just it just wasn't a priority for anybody. Yeah, I think the story was made either by Dino De Laurentiis' company or can't remember who originally made it, but it was basically a pickup by Orion, and they were just like, well, we see the potential in this, so we'll just throw it out there, see if it sticks, and it stuck.
And we might as well, get to the story a little bit. The story as it exists. It's two complete morons who think, Caesar's a salad dressing dude. Joan of Arc is Noah's wife. Napoleon's a dead French dude. Like, it's just, these guys are not Mensa candidates. But for some reason, they are responsible for unifying the world through their music. And so the future has to send Rufus, played by George Carlin, back in time to help these two complete morons pass their final history report, otherwise they fail and the band will never be formed that brings unity to the universe. And then it just kind of runs with the idea in ways that I really like. It's old hat now because I've seen it so many times. But at the time, like, they really played with ideas in some really interesting ways that it's almost like Doctor Who levels of playing around with like time travel and bringing about these characters. And there was definitely an intelligence put behind how they assembled the cast of historical figures. Like, going to get Billy the Kid made the most sense because they spoke the same language, and he was kind of a ruffian and kind of a little rough around the edges and would probably fit in fine with Bill and Ted. And so he was able to be the go-between with the other historical figures in some way, and then building it out from there. Like, it's a really smartly written film for how stupid it is. And that's what I think has made it endure for so long.
I completely agree. It's one of these movies that's very proud of its stupidity, but it's also about stupidity. It's not a movie that even celebrates how dumb Bill and Ted are, which is one of the reasons I forgive the movie for its many sins.
This is the late 80s. Like, the late 80s, it's just...
80s, so yeah, so there's homophobic slurs, and they are played for laughs. And the way, I would certainly defend those moments even now, even though, of course, those words are not acceptable, is that these guys are idiots. They're stupid. They're morons. It's amazing they know how to put their shoes on, let alone they know how to operate this telephone booth. And obviously there's a Doctor Who nod with the telephone booth. And I gotta say, like, I like the effects of this movie. I've always liked it. I've always really, obviously heavily computer generated for what they had in '89, but I always thought very impressed and polished and beautiful, despite the fact that this movie is, clearly they didn't have much of a budget, particularly for the first one. I'm a big proponent of any comedy. I'm a big advocate for any comedy that has a high concept, but it pushes it as far as it can go. And that's what this movie is. They take time to give us a subplot about Napoleon Bonaparte being lost at the San Dimas Mall. I love it. It's so stupid.
No, getting ditched at the bowling alley because he's such a tool.
Yeah, forgive me. Like, it's not even that one scene. Like, I'm overlooking it. There's the whole subplot about the kids having to, like, babysit Napoleon while Bill and Ted are abducting more historical figures. I love it. Like, they actually took the time to like let's make this a priority. Let's give Napoleon some of the funniest scenes in the movie, and it works. It absolutely worked. It is stupid, but you're right. It's smart stupid. It's like it's lowbrow humor, but like it's done very well. And despite there's a few moments I think that are vaguely mean-spirited, but it's actually like a really sweet comedy. And I feel the same way about the sequel. I feel like these movies, they're not edgy and they're not particularly nasty because it's about two guys who are just dopes.
Well, and you take Napoleon, who is easily I think he's pretty much the biggest jackass in the entire movie. By the time, once he hits Waterloo, he suddenly becomes really fun and like finds humanity through going on water slides and is suddenly just full of life and happiness. And it's just like they pulled a turnaround on this guy because I really did not like this character. And suddenly, like, he's having a good time and you're having a good time and everyone's having a good time.
It's a funny idea because the movie plays fast and loose with any kind of logic. They get Abraham Lincoln in there, and Lincoln, not only is he, historically one of our great U.S. presidents, but in the hands of this movie, he takes all of this very well, that he's been abducted by these guys, that he is made, he's part of their exhibition for basically a homework assignment, for God's sake. Like, but the movie, like, it honors its own cracked logic. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, they find stuff Socrates, and like Socrates is hitting on one of the Bill or Ted's mom. I think it's probably Ted's mom. Yeah. But
depends on the movie on whose mom she is. But yeah,
it's very debatable. But but my point being is that like this movie, it has lowbrow. It's lowbrow and it's low budget, but it doesn't think that way. It thinks very big. It's really nutty. They give you more historical figures than they need. The movie really could have been about just the abduction of Jesse, of Billy the Kid. It could have been about the abduction of Joan of Arc. The fact that they jump so many different times, they find jokes about Iron Maiden to get in there. There's so many really funny one-liners. You just get the sense like this could have been a real embarrassment, and instead everybody looks like they're having a good time. And it's like the movie has better production values than expect. And as I mentioned, like Bill and Ted, as embodied by Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, like they're both really inspired here. They're really funny here.
They
They're
are.
so good. You would assume that they are exactly like these characters, and they're not.
I think so. Like whenever I go in to see a movie, I really want to see that it creates its own universe, it creates its own rules, and then it plays by those rules. If
Yeah.
it does that, I'm going to do my best to go along for the ride. And this film very easily could have just been like, rules, we don't need rules. And you can pull off a good film doing that, but it's incredibly hard. But the fact that they kept the constraints of the plot and the characters to within that idea of what this universe is really let Winter and Reeves really play around with that idea and play in that universe. And it let them feel like it didn't feel like a burden when they're having to try to juggle all this dialogue and these high concepts. It's just they're just along for the ride. They're having a good time, and it encourages you to go along for that ride too, which I think is a really big part of the magic for the film.
I agree. Like there's some of these movies that just kind of leave a bad taste in my mouth. I like Fast Times at Ridgemont High as an example, but it's gritty, it's edgy, and at times it's really ugly. There's some of these movies that it's not just that they're dated; it's just that they have there's a nastiness to them. And with Bill and Ted, I mean, it's no mistake that they have their own cartoon show and they have their own comic book. They're very appealing to kids because, on the one hand, most kids can relate to this. I suspect this movie will be a very thorough history lesson for very young children. But at the same time, it's like you could look up to these guys and you like these guys because who can't relate to like, oh my God, I have homework, I have a presentation to give in front of my class or the whole student body. There is a fantasy wish fulfillment aspect to this whole movie. It's like, man, I have to talk about Abraham Lincoln for 10 minutes and the teacher's getting me on the clock. Wouldn't it be great if I just got Abraham Lincoln to do it for me? That's kind of like what the whole impetus of the movie seems to be. And I think they take it as far as it could go.
You suddenly gave me this mental image. This is why I've been laughing. Of COVID parents having to teach their kids at home. And we've always had that time where it's like the teacher throws in a movie and says, here, learn something from this. When I was in high school, my international history teacher at one point was like, y'all have been working hard. You're doing great. We're watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Like, wow. I could see a parent doing that with Bill and Ted, and just, it kind of breaks my brain, but I totally feel that on a very core and emotional level.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this and Bernie Casey. We should mention Bernie Casey as the principal. I mean, this is like one of the great actors of the blaxploitation film movement. This is a great cast. This is a
Hal Langdon Jr. is so good as Ted's dad.
And yeah, he's great as Ted's dad. You're right. He's really funny in this. And Clarence Clemens, the saxophonist from the Tonight Show. Clarence Clemens is one of the futuristic, I guess, heads of the world in the future scenes. He's looking anyway. Yeah, there's some really cool people in this movie.
Yeah, I had a wonderful opportunity, thanks to Mr. Walter Child, a guest on our first episode back. When he was working for a theater chain, I don't know that he didn't mention which one he worked for, so I won't. But he was able to bring out Jane Wiedlin to watch the film with the audience and then do a concert afterwards. And come to find out, this was like 2-3 years ago, I guess. It was the first time she'd seen it since the film released.
Wow, that's cool.
And being able to talk to her, and she's like, I forgot just how much fun this movie is. Like, and hearing her talk about the blast that she had, and she's like, I'm just this kid in a punk band. I don't know what I'm doing. And you never would have guessed it because she's just absolutely charming in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the critics that hated this movie, and there were lots and lots of those in 1980, and the critics that hated this movie, they've really overlooked how charming the movie is because it's very charming and it's so much better than anybody thought it would be. It's if you look at even like some of the Porky sequels or some of the movies that were coming out around this time that were like Dream a Little Dream. I'm trying to think like just bad movies that had like wide teen appeal. They weren't very well made. They were obviously just cash grabs. They weren't done with any kind of imagination. They weren't witty at all. And this movie is all those things.
Yeah, it's incredibly endearing. So when a film gets this endearing, you forgive a lot. Like you said, you forgive a lot of the film's sins. There's a lot of like just kind of over the top, really, this is going to happen, that you let it roll because Keanu and Alex Winter are just so charming and just so lovable. They're such lovable dorks that you let it go.
Yes, there's lots of contrivances, but it's like the whole thing is a contrivance. Like there's no, whatever. I agree with you. The movie operates in its own version of logic, but it's also the most illogical story ever. I mean, this is science fiction in the loosest sense of science, but it's fun. Again, it's like if you look at it as like a teenage fantasy, it absolutely hits the sweet spot. I've never given a speech in front of a group of, from an assembly where people are like, yeah, woo, but I've always wanted to.
Yeah, it's the dream. It lets you have that wish fulfillment, and it ends on a beautiful note. We get the princesses back into the picture, and it's just like, oh, this is a good place to end. I'm really enjoyed this journey, and it still left me wanting enough that when I heard, hey, they're doing a sequel, I was like, oh, sweet. I can't wait to watch this movie. Now, to be fair, cue Letterkenny gag there. This was a time when I didn't have the greatest of cinematic tastes. Like, I liked the Alex Puyin Captain America movie about this time. Like, so take that for what you will. But oddly enough, I didn't like Bogus Journey when it came out. And then I saw it as I was older, and I was like, this is an entirely different thing. And rewatching it again now, it's an entirely different beast. But I don't know that I was begging to have them revisit this movie 2 years later.
Yeah, I saw Bogus Journey opening day, the same exact theater where I saw the first one, and I laughed hysterically through most of it. I loved it the first time, although the thing that surprises me is that looking at it just recently, I still think it's the best of the two. I love this movie. They obviously had a budget this time. It was amazing that everybody, that most of the original participants came back. This one is a different director. The first one was directed by an American named Stephen Herrick. As I said, he went on to make The Mighty Ducks and a bunch of other really successful films, most of which were family-oriented. And the sequel was directed by Peter Hewitt. This is his film debut. He's an English filmmaker. It does have a slightly different feel, if anything, just because the scope of it is very big. It's a special effects comedy with a lot of special effects, a lot of animatronics, a lot of like what was very elaborate CGI for the time. The sequel it's a bigger thing, but I love it. I mean, it was shot under the title Bill and Ted Go to Hell, which they couldn't use for marketing purposes. So Bogus Journey was a compromise, but it's a cool freaking movie. I love this film, and I the use of special effects for comedy. I would compare it to Ghostbusters. It's not as good as Ghostbusters. It's not as big as Ghostbusters. But like, for example, like the scene where Ted is haunted by his grandma, and it's played by him with all the heavy facial makeup.
Yes.
Or the same scene, the Easter Bunny, or the whole scene in hell, the whole scene in heaven. Like, it's not using effects for stupidity. Like, they're using it as a storytelling tool, and that really impresses me when people do that.
So let's go ahead and roll the trailer. Before we do that, like, I have to go back to my wide shot, because behind me over my shoulder is Bill and Ted Go to Hell issue #1. Just wanted to point that out real quick. We'll come back to this. Let's go ahead and roll the trailer. We'll be right back to talk more about Bogus Journey.
I have a feeling we're about to embark upon a most unprecedented expedition.
Once they made history.
I must see to it that you die.
Now, they are history. Bill and Ted are dead.
Welcome to hell.
It's the Grim Reaper, dude. How's it hanging, Def?
So when I was a kid and saw this movie, I didn't really like it that much. I thought it was a horrible movie. I was not a fan in any way, shape, or form. I think I mentioned this when we talked about it however many years upon years ago, a decade ago or whatever. But it really hit me seeing it this week that the film, I think it was purely an expectations thing. Like, I was expecting more of Bill and Ted, and this ended up going in an entirely different direction, and I don't think my still forming brain was quite ready for that. So I really couldn't appreciate what they were doing and what they were going for. But you said you enjoyed it the first time you saw it.
I did. Yeah, I loved it. But I will say, though, I think the movie peaks because, I think the introduction of the Bill and Ted robots is hilarious, that these robots are just as stupid as the people they're pretending to be. So it's like the whole Terminator thing. It's like, imagine if like they sent Terminators, but they were dumb. I love that concept. And I think to watch Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves basically play these characters is even more moronic, which I thought was so funny to watch them play off themselves. I just great. I love the hell and heaven sequences. We could talk more about those scenes individually, but when you get to the third act, where Station is basically the main important character that's driving the plot, it just felt like a corny kids movie, and I don't think the ending is as satisfying as the first ones was. There's that big reveal about where Rufus has been the whole movie, which I thought was, kind of forced. I don't know. Like, I think this is the funnier movie, and I think it's certainly from a technical and even like an innovation standpoint, it's a better film. But I do think it peaks about an hour in.
Yeah, I think you mentioning how the film wasn't a complete success at the end made me kind of think of The Explorers, like how Joe Dante can do a great film and sometimes he just can't quite stick the landing. And The Explorers is that an example of that. He's still one of my favorite filmmakers of all time.
Yeah,
Nothing taken away from him.
You're absolutely right. The ending, the third act of that movie is a disaster. Yeah, but I do love that movie though. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the beginning of it. Like, I love the conceit of their teaching school using the phone booth and bringing characters, historical figures back. But it's just kind of I love when they introduce Evil Bill and Evil Ted. Absolutely, it's such a beautiful, wonderful thing that yes, they are just as stupid because they have to be Bill and Ted, and that was great. But it felt like the movie was kind of stalling out until they kill Bill and Ted. For me, like it was pretty good, but it just kind of had this mean streak about it. It wasn't that fun, and I figured out what it was. It felt very 90s in how it was shot, like the kind of the slightly wide angle lens to make everything feel a little bit more surreal, and just the way that they shot everything, the filters they used, the color correction, it felt very 90s and very out of its time and very dated somehow, like almost like straight to video in a way. Until they went out to the classic iconic Star Trek shooting location and they kill Bill and Ted.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Once that happens, that movie kicks into high gear. I mean, even down to like Evil Bill and Ted hawking loogies on the corpses. Like, they bring back that wonderful that wonderful homophobic humor that still was around in the early 90s. That's just kind of, it felt more forced. I understood in the context of the thing, it was like doing a callback to the first film. It's okay, but obviously it wasn't okay. And I'm gonna have I have an opinion about why I'm kind of okay with the idea of that after we talk about this when we're talking in the context for the third film. Purely us guessing what it could end up being. Yeah. But as soon as William Sadler shows up, like this was my introduction to William Sadler. And him doing his take on the Bergman figure of Death and the Grim Reaper is just a thing of beauty to behold.
Yeah.
Because he plays it so straight and so dour. And then like the cracks start showing in the facade. And it's a very gradual, subtle transition from being, just this iconic figure in mythology who is a very somber duty to joking about Melvins. It feels like it comes out of nowhere, but frankly, the performance is so nuanced. He imbues the character of Death with a little more fun and a little more fun just as it goes on, and he's the highlight to the film for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's strange that he manages to almost steal the whole film. In playing this character. My introduction to him was the year before. William Sadler was the bad guy in Die Hard 2. And it was hard to forget because his first scene, he's doing jujitsu naked. And, it's the 90s, so of course it's not like graphic nudity, but like that was the first time I ever saw him. Like, this guy's interesting. And, he's the bad guy and he's like fighting with John McClane on the wing of the plane at the end of the film.
That's how I expect you to see the first time you saw Willem Dafoe. I'll be really honest.
There you go. Yeah. So it was bizarre to see him in Bill and Ted 2. But like, you're right. It's not only is it a nuanced performance, he is tonally absolutely in tone with the whole thing. Like he gets what this movie is, and again, not to like throw Carlin under the bus. I just think Carlin just was underused in these movies.
Yeah. He was underutilized for sure.
But like but like it's certainly in this movie. I feel like Carlin's barely in this one. But William Sadler, like, he is one of the comic secret weapons of this movie because he takes it as far as it would go. And the script, I mean, he is working with a funny script and a funny character, but like he's completely dedicated to what a Looney Tunes cartoon this is. And he's obviously aware of the iconic, as you said, the Bergman reference from the Seventh Seal. So he starts there, and then it becomes this character about this being that becomes like an innocent child by the end of it. It's strangely endearing, but it is.
It's funny. I didn't see The Seventh Seal until probably like within the past 5 years or so.
Yeah.
And so seeing that, and it is a beautiful film, and it's a heart-wrenching film, and it is a phenomenal film. It is the masterpiece and work of art that everyone has said it is. It gave me so much more appreciation for Sadler's performance in Bogus Journey. Just like, there's a connective tissue here that they didn't have to do. Now, sometimes the film goes a little bit too far of lengths. Like when they bring back Amy Stock to play, well, it was Bill's stepmom, but now it's Ted's stepmom. And like, I didn't need, like, even bringing Missy in later with the seance scene, which is goofy and fun in its own right. I don't know that I really needed to know that. I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of kicking a guy in the junk while he's down for poor Bill's dad. Like, he's just like, he's yearning after Missy while munching on a Twinkie. And it's so sad and pathetic.
I do love the scene, and it's around that same time. This is I believe it's the post Heaven and Hell sequence. I love the scene where they possess the dad. I do love that scene. It's stupid, but it's funny.
And Hal Landon puts in an MVP performance there.
Guitar, I love that. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. What was the guy's name who was with Hal Landon? Hang on here.
Well, let's see. Like, because one of the actors is the guy who plays Dr. Edgemore in Total Recall.
I think that's who I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a great character actor.
Yeah, but like, that's not, dudes playing another dude is not an easy trick to pull off.
Right.
And they
Plus, he's playing one of these goofy teenagers. Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing to watch. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it works because again, it's like these guys are completely committed to how ridiculous this is.
Yeah, and they're trying so hard, and you can see the performances. You can see Bill and Ted in them, while still being those awkward dads, and it's just so lovely. Like, it's the weirdest thing ever.
It is, and I wanted to ask you something, Dave, because like I did my prep for this episode a couple weeks ago, and I did a binge of like Bill and Ted 1 and 2. But like, one of my favorite gags, as I'm sitting here, I'm trying to remember if it was in the first film or the second film or both movies. But one of my favorite things about this movie, and maybe it is the first movie, I'm not sure, but there is like, we were talking about the idea of logic. I do love how at one point it's like, dude, you got to remember to go back and put the keys here. Otherwise, this will never happen. Is that in both movies or just the first one?
Yes. So in the first one, it's we have to go steal my dad's keys. In the second one, it's at the final showdown with, with who is it? With Joss Ackland, who is just
right. Yeah, Lobolos.
Yeah, Denomolos. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, thank you. I've seen both of these movies so many times, but watching them back to back, I had it's like I couldn't remember. Like, is this strictly the first movie? Or, it feels like one movie to me now.
It felt like, so the first like 10, 15 minutes of the film felt like it needed to cram in as many callbacks to the first film as it possibly could, and that's to the movie's detriment, in my opinion. But once they actually go to hell, and you talk about Alex Winter playing his own grandma, it's just that utterly creepy thing, like that creepy scene.
I love that.
It really kicks into high gear and becomes its own thing, and I really respect that with the film. Like, again, it sets up its rules, and then it plays within that universe without breaking the universe and without breaking the rules. Which, considering what they pull off, that's a heck of an achievement to not lose me in the film.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, I love that the hell sequence is so brilliant. I mean, I do. It's my favorite line in the movie where they're forced to do infinity push-ups, and he's like, "Dude, do you think we could do it?" He's like, "Maybe we could do it girly style."
And it's like every guy has had that, like, do 50 push-ups. It's like, I can't do that. So like,
yeah.
It's so much fun. Like, it also takes on some heady material about like the idea of legacy and coming to grips of not living up to your own full potential.
Which, not necessarily jump to it, but I think that's exactly what the third film is about. And it's interesting, like this movie sets that up. And the third movie is, apparently the premise is that they never created that life-changing song that they were supposed to do after all these years. So now, like, they're creating a paradox for their own legacy.
Yeah, So I guess we can just kind of let's wrap up Bogus Journey, and then we can kind of conjecture about the third film.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's far sillier than the first film.
Yes. Yeah.
And like you said, the whole station thing, like the idea of station's great, but the execution is just kind of a little creepy. And like you said, like they had a higher budget, and it's very clear that they committed a lot of budget to that creation of that creature. So they had to give that creature a lot of screen time.
Yes.
Probably more than it needed. So now,
honestly, if they'd cast an actor, I think it might have even gone over a little better, or just like maybe just change the concept of it. But it's obviously, I mean, it's an animatronic creature. It's an animatronic head with a guy walking around, or two guys at some point, and it's an actor doing the little cutesy goobly gobbly voices. I don't know. I just like these are not necessarily children's films, but that part of the movie, I thought this is really, I don't know.
And
just,
to be clear,
it doesn't like the wit wasn't there. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like the hell scenes, the heaven scene, which we haven't talked about, was hilarious. That they mugged their way into heaven. I mean, there's like it's clearly like it's not satire necessarily, but it is clever. It is funny. It is upending expectations. But towards the end of the film, it does feel like this feels like Saturday morning kind of stuff. This feels like the cartoon show we'd eventually get.
Yeah, bringing up heaven, like what I thought was so endearing about these characters and brought like to the core that they are good guys. It's like, hey God, sorry, we mugged some people. Like, I'm sure you already know that, but we're gonna fess up to it right up front. Like that showed a lot of character that they didn't have to do for this movie. Like, really, the movie doesn't hinge on whether they fess up to mugging 3 people to get into heaven and putting putting death in the American Gothic dress. But the fact that they did it spoke volumes about who they were, and made them a lot more lovable. Now, growing up in California, like seeing the Builders Emporium that they went to, that was absolutely a real store that I knew all about. It was just like seeing that. It's like, wow, that place has been around for decades, and I love that it's in this movie. But yeah, when it gets, good.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I totally agree with you. The thing that I think about this that really works about this sequel, as well as the performances from Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, they're very true to these characters. They get these characters, and it's consistent from the first film to the last film. You could even argue that they haven't even become remotely smarter since the last film. Really, not really. I love, like you mentioned, the moment where they see God, they immediately start confessing, which I agree, that's a wonderful moment. I also love when they see Satan for the first time, and one of them was like, "Dude, who's that?" Like, dude, who do you think that is?
What was it? The album covers of our youth lied to us.
That's right. Yeah. Like it's an insanely quotable movie for, I think, 60, 70 minutes, and then at the end it just feels like, okay, like they have to wrap this up. It just feels like the screenplay kind of kicks in, and I don't blame the writers. It's the same writers. I don't have their names right in front of me. I should. It's Ed Solomon and Chris
Matheson.
They've written. It's 2 dudes. They wrote all 3 films.
Yes, Chris Matheson and Ed Solomon.
Thank you. Yeah, they're great. They're great. They're really clever. They're really funny. And they obviously, again, they take these movies as far as they can go. Yeah, it's just the third film. I feel like they invest so much in the second act, which is so inventive and so crazy, and it's really like everything you'd want it to be. And the ending is like, okay, it's just like tying up a lot of loose ends and some busy work. They basically tell you where Rufus has been the whole movie, and it's such a dumb reveal.
But we got some really cool cameos again, like Pam Grier. It's just like, you got Pam Grier to do this? Okay. But it's like, she's in a kind of a lull in her career at this point. So it's like, hey, why wouldn't she do it?
Why not? Yeah.
And then the first band you see at the Battle of the Bands is freaking Primus. I'm like, wait, what? Okay. But again, they weren't that big yet at that point. So it's like, it's all good. Yeah. Primus is in. Yeah, we're in. No worries. And
Faith No More is in the opening scene.
Yes. What is he? And you got Sir James Martin. Jim Martin plays Sir James Martin in the film. Like, it's very tongue in cheek, but it's very fun. The final showdown is very much, once again, a callback to the first film with the, well, we're going to do this. Well, I'm going to do that. Well, we're going to do this. And it's only because I won't get into spoiling it because it is a fun time. It is a fun payoff, but it's nothing. It had to end. Like, it wasn't a big rousing ending. It was just, well, we got to end this somehow.
Yes, and I agree with you. The big finale on stage is not as good as the presentation in the first movie.
And it's hard to live up to that because that was such a new and inventive thing. Like, that's part of the burden of having to live up to an original film when you're doing a sequel. Is it's hard to top it. I mean, we just talked about John Wick last week, where it's like all you can do is just amp up the action more and more, and the story can get so convoluted. Like, it started getting kind of convoluted, and I'm curious to see what they're going to do with the third film, because they found a way to kind of end it. They're like, this is potentially getting out of control here and out of hand. Let's just end it here.
Yeah. Yeah, and we also should consider as well, like the first movie it was made in 88, came out in 89, and this is 2 years later, so they probably got production going as soon as the first movie cleared. I think about $40 million. The first movie was a big fat hit. So this is just a few years removed. And I love that, again, it's the same writers have created the third film, so they've had a lot of time to think about this. And that's one of the things that excites me. Not to bunny trail or derail this good conversation.
No, we're into bunny trail territory. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, well, Blade Runner 2049. One of my favorite things about that movie is clearly it was written by writers who knew that first film, have been obsessed with that first film, have been thinking about it for a long time. It doesn't feel like okay, let's just do Blade Runner again. Let's have Harrison Ford shoot replicants. No, like they really thought about what that first film was about, what needed to be spoken about, what needed to be addressed. And with this third Bill and Ted, I'm not expecting a particularly deep film, and I think that would be a mistake of anybody to expect anything particularly.
The trailer kind of lays that out. Yeah,
something silly, and self-consciously silly, and like embracingly silly. But I suspect because it's from them, and because Alex and Keanu are back, it's probably pretty good. They probably really came up with something, and which is good because why do a third one unless you really have something that a story that's worth telling.
Well, yeah, and like Alex Winter has made a name for himself as a director. Like I just saw Showbiz Kids just premiered on HBO, and that is a phenomenal documentary that definitely could have been informed by his own experiences as a child actor. But the fact that they made the choice to have him not be in it, and have like the fact that he's lived it be the driving force behind wanting to tell the stories of all these other actors, really showed restraint and a beautiful bit of artistic flair. So it's like, I really believe that if this wasn't a really cool idea to them, they wouldn't be doing a third film.
Yes.
Like the third trailer, it seems just as goofy as Boca's Journey and the first film. Like make no mistake about it. This is going to be a Bill and Ted movie, but like you Rabbit did trail at one point. I'm going to do it myself. I see, like we talk about the problematic humor in the first one, doing the derogatory F-bomb is what I'll call it. I know that when I was a stupid kid in my 20s, I said a lot of hateful things and had some points of view that weren't informed in reality and life experience, that I look back on and it's just like, oh, that wasn't okay. And to bring a fairly recent filmmaker into context, Jason Trost, who did the FP movies. The first film, I don't know if you've seen either of those. Have you?
I saw the first one.
Okay. Second one's on Amazon Prime, Beats of Rage. The first one had a lot of problematic terminology, I'll say, dropping N-bombs and stuff like that. And it's very clear that when he made the second film, he progressed a lot as a filmmaker, like just and as a human being. It's like, there were terms that were used in the first film. We're going to reassign other words to those terms for the second film. And it really showed a lot of growth, on his part. It's a bug nuts, bat poop insane movie. I mean, it's still based around DDR in a post-apocalyptic future. So don't think that's getting super highbrow. He told me before the movie came out, there's a 2-drink minimum to enjoy this movie. I went to it sober and still enjoyed it. It's a really weird movie, but like I see that as an example of, we can see where Bill and Ted are now and see them progress as human beings. And I have enough faith in Solomon and Matheson, as well as Winter and Reeves, to really take these characters to the next level and see how they've matured and how they see themselves as failures. And I think it's going to be a really interesting film. Like I could see this being the midlife crisis movie from Generation X.
Yeah, and what a perfect time. I think most of us are feeling, certainly most of us Gen Xers are feeling some kind of midlife crisis for one reason or another. And we should also mention Dean Parasad, a director we really like, the director of Galaxy Quest, is helming the third film. Great choice. His it's not that every film he's made has been as good as Galaxy Quest, but Galaxy Quest, that's one of those films, like I'm kind of embarrassed how much I resisted it. I think I've told you, like when it came out, I thought the trailer looked really stupid. It it didn't look like a good movie to me. And seeing it, I couldn't believe how wonderful it is. It's a wonderful film. And certainly to think of the tone of that movie, I can't think of a better guy to hand over the Bill and Ted franchise over to.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with the release, because I'm assuming the budget isn't exactly massive on this thing. And it's being put up by Orion. So again, not exactly a massive studio. I'm on the Bill and Ted page on Facebook. Like I'm one of the fans on there, or members of the group, whatever. And there's been a lot of discussion about, do we want to see this movie no matter what, or does it have to be in theaters? And it's like, I could see this being a great drive-in movie potentially.
Yes.
But I could also see, kind of like how in our conversation about what Denver Film's doing, being able to be agile enough to take some chances and try to embark on some new stuff. I could see them taking a chance on this being a VOD release and like charging, I hate to say Trolls World Tour movie, but I'd pay $20 to see the movie. I'll be really honest.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, this is an event film. I remember, as you may remember, this is like 5, 6, 7 years ago or something. I can't remember. I think 2013, 2014, when World War Z came out. You may remember this. It was an experiment on the part of Paramount. Do you remember this? They actually charged, if you wanted to watch it at home, it was a $50 ticket. And you got posters, you got like all kinds of swag and stuff. And it was this experiment on Paramount's part to see like how far we can do, an early, not even an early screening. It was like opening weekend. You get to watch it at home, $50. So, you have a party, you have like a bunch of people over, they're all throwing in money. And it doesn't matter what the movie is. And it was interesting because the experiment wasn't that successful, because most people, the movie had a gigantic opening, and it showed that most people at that point in time, obviously, would rather see that movie in the theater. Now it's a different deal. I agree with you. I think people would be willing to shell out $20 for the new Keanu Reeves movie, especially since Keanu Reeves is now like one of the top box office stars. It's amazing that he's returned to that crown, but because of John Wick and a few other films, and also just because we like the guy, and plus he's making the new Matrix movie as we speak, he's back on top. So I suspect this movie, whether it opens at a drive-in theater or whether it's video on demand, it's probably going to make a pretty big wave. And and of course we're assuming it's going to be a great movie. Certainly hope so. But even
good. If it's good, I'm happy.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. At least it's good. But at the very least, it's probably going to open big. So yeah, I likewise, I'd welcome that. And I'll tell you what, like as you're aware, and I certainly am aware, drive-in movie theaters nationwide are killing it so hard right now. I think it would be perfect to make this a drive-in event. I think it would be a blockbuster. If they want to do a drive-in double feature of Bill and Ted Face the Music and Galaxy Quest, they would sell out for weekends.
When you've got Walmart doing parking lot drive-ins like at 160 locations, there's a desire to see movies still. It's just wanting to try to find a way to do it responsibly.
Yes.
And so yeah. I will, if it's in a drive-in, I would absolutely be down. We've got a couple drive-ins in the Denver area. I would absolutely go to one to see it. If I can watch it at home on my, my plasma with the surround sound, I would probably do that instead, because it's going to be a more comfortable experience, even though it's not quite as communal.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm very hopeful. I'm hoping it's fantastic going forward. I wish them nothing but the best. I've been stoked ever since I heard they were making it. Every set photo I've been thrilled about. The trailer I'm a little iffy on, but I'm just like, having seen the first 2 films, I'm willing to give it a little bit of latitude and see how it's going to be. And I'm very hopeful for it.
Yeah, likewise. The fact that they made a Bill and Ted 3, this is one of those dream sequels. It's like Wayne's World 3. It's just like, I never thought in my lifetime, obviously there is no Wayne's World 3 and probably never will be, but this is a dream. I never thought there'd be a third Bill and Ted. I've always wanted to see these characters back, which is why we haven't touched upon it, the animated series, which is why I actually give the animated series a shot for a little while until I realized, this is that time when Saturday morning cartoons were like, they were franchising the heck out of everything. And, which is one of the reasons I was a big fan of the Teen Wolf cartoon, despite the fact that the Teen Wolf cartoon isn't even as good as Teen Wolf. So, but there you have it.
There you go. Oh, wow. Is it as bad as Teen Wolf 2?
It kind of lives in that same universe. The last time I saw
it, I remember that. Yeah, wasn't Edward Herrmann in it or something?
Yeah, it's the whole wolf. And there are a couple episodes about the whole wolf family. They're trying to try world building in the Teen Wolf franchise. I enjoyed the Teen Wolf cartoon. It's probably my favorite of like the 80s kitschy, spin-off movie cartoon series on Saturday mornings. But even more so than Beetlejuice. I thought Beetlejuice kind of spin its wheels out a little bit. But But yeah, it's still looking at it now as a grown up, the animation isn't great. The stories are very redundant. It's like the quality isn't there. Whereas like today, I think it's obviously a lot slicker today, but I don't know, heart's not there.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up there because I think we've gone. Wow, we've done pretty well. We're trying to keep these episodes about an hour or so. I guess, yeah. Well, next week we're going to do kind of a catch up on what we've been watching. We've done some live streams, and just like full disclosure, haven't had a whole lot of feedback on them. From those who have, I appreciate y'all a ton. Feel free to respond in comments on the videos themselves. But as opposed to like trying to do an entire different day to do a recording just of that, it just kind of seems like until there's a demand for it, we're probably just going to do like what we've been watching episodes, just kind of catching up and not worry about doing the live interaction. Although you can always hit us up on Facebook, YouTube, email, wherever. I mean, we're going to respond. We respond to just about everything that gets posted. After that, we're probably going to take a break for a week just to do a little regrouping and strategizing and fun stuff like that. Dave also needs to learn some new tricks, like, getting it set up so that I can do this is awesome. And then go back to the two shot. I need to get up a scene set up for Barry. I need to get all that programmed. There's other prep work to try to take the show kind of to a next level production wise. Hopefully the audio is far better, this episode and last episode than the previous weeks. But if you want to reach out to us, by all means do hit us a podcast, Dave, Barry, all at ScreenGeeks.com. Shoot us a voicemail if you want to at 970-315-2048. Barry, where can we find you on the internet? I don't think I asked you last week at when we did John Wick. We were just having too much fun.
That's okay. No, I'm all over. Just Google my name. My movie reviews are everywhere. I have an article up right now. It's on the Hollywood and Toto site. I got a little nostalgic for a movie I hadn't seen since I was 13 years old, and I loved it when I was 13. So I decided to take a leap of faith, and I watched James Belushi in Mr. Destiny, and boy, was I punished for my nostalgia. So I wrote an article about that. That's currently on the Hollywood and Toto site. I think if you just Google Barry Wurst, Mr. Destiny movie review, you could read it. But I like the article. It's great when you go back and you find a movie that's just perfect. Like, oh, it's as good as I remember. This was like just kind of, I'd like to have a little sit down talk to my 13-year-old self and question my 13-year-old self's taste in movies like Mr. Destiny starring James Belushi. So that's the latest article that's up, and I have some more articles coming up. But yeah, you can find me in Hollywood Toto, or just go to Rotten Tomatoes or Google Barry Wurst Rotten Tomatoes, and my list of reviews will come up. So yeah,
it's why I haven't revisited that late 80s Captain America movie, because I know it's not good.
Everything you remember about it that you loved, definitely hold on to that, because I saw that a couple of years ago, and yeah, not good.
I remember the highlight being that, like, me thinking that the Red Skull doing a Bela Lugosi impersonation was a good thing and a highlight for the film. And in retrospect, I'm like, that's probably not good. So I'm just going to let that memory sit there. I remember when it hit Blu-ray a few years ago, and I'm like, do I revisit this? I think I'm just going to let that lie. But if you want to catch up, good.
No, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say I should also mention I'm about to teach I'm teaching a summer school class right now, and I'm about to teach my horror film class, which starts on August 24th. Anyone who's interested in taking a horror film class from me, a big horror geek, that starts August 24th. That's Wednesdays, 6 o'clock to 8:45 Maui time. Yeah, I'd love to have you as a student. It's an online class, obviously, like all online classes. So go to UHMC and register if you're interested. It's a 3-credit college course on the history and legacy of horror films.
And yeah, you did a Facebook post that you made public, so I went ahead and shared that to the Screen Geek site as well. So
you're doing that.
Absolutely, of course. If you want to hit all episodes of our podcast, go ahead and hit ScreenGeeks.com. If you want to watch old video episodes of Volume 2 or whatever it is we're calling this, you can catch us at Facebook.com/ScreenGeeks or YouTube.ScreenGeeks.com. I've already done the voicemail number and the emails. Our music is provided by 5 Iron Frenzy, as always. Yes. Many thanks to them. And we'll be having some fun next week talking about stuff we've been catching up on, like Watchmen. And I'm starting to watch Warrior Nun, and I'm starting to question my life choices a little bit, but... We'll see how that goes going forward. I'm not sure how far I'll get, but I've been watching other stuff too. So until then, this is Dave.
Barry.
Take it easy. We'll catch you next week.